Hi there. I am Phil Weiser, the dean here at the law school, the executive director of the Silicon Flatiron Center, and I have the distinct pleasure of offering an opening benediction. In doing so, I am outranked by Rabbi Golds on the panel. The topic of tech transfer is personal and relevant to me on lots of levels, including that when I was appointed and I was a faculty member in the Law School Institute in Technology, I was very quickly tapped to be on a search committee looking for the new head of tech transfer. And Larry Gold was a part of that as well. And I remember distinctly the conversation with Larry. He said, we need to get more students involved with tech transfer. This operation shouldn't be this like thing removed from campus. It should be of the campus and a team sport. And that has been something that I've been able to work on with Larry and others since. You'll get to hear from Kate Tallman, who is officially now the head of our tech transfer operation. Congratulations, Kate. We're thrilled to have you. And you'll also get to hear from other people thinking about and wrestling with these issues. This is a very interesting time for technology transfer, for patent strategies, ideas around open innovation. This is a special community here in Boulder. We have a wonderful entrepreneurial community. We have a great set of students. We can be at the frontier of developing national models in this area. And so let me say just a few other words and then I'll turn it over. There are a lot of people in the audience who deserve special acknowledgement, including all those who sponsored Silicon Flatirons. One special person is Juan Rodriguez, who helped set up the Deming Center as an interdisciplinary effort between the business school and the engineering school. Juan's far-sighted leadership as an entrepreneur in this community, co-founded Storage Tech, which was a huge deal in developing a storage industry for the last 40 years. You do the tree of all the people who worked at Storage Tech and what they've done since. It's a tremendous part of this community. He's also been committed to this campus, having interdisciplinary entrepreneurship. And so that spirit continues, and one thing we have going on now is a new venture challenge. We had the kickoff a couple weeks ago. There's still time for students to get involved. That is obviously something relating to technology transfer, getting students together, working with each other, staff, faculty, to help develop business ideas. And that's a very exciting opportunity, something that if people have interested in, talk to Brad Bernthal. And that'll be my cue to hand off to Brad Bernthal. For people who know Brad, you know what an exceptional contributor he has been and a partner to so many in this community. He, among other things, teaches our entrepreneurial law clinic, which has worked a lot with tech transfer and companies coming off this campus. He's the one who has led the New Venture Challenge and helped spearhead it, along with other entrepreneurial activities that Silicon Flatirons has been involved in. So it is my great pleasure to introduce Brad Bernthal. We can take it from there.
Thank you, Phil. In the back, is the microphone on? Is that Kelsey back there? Hey, welcome back. Yeah, great to have you here. Thank you, Phil, for the introduction. And as part of kicking off the first panel, I'm going to do four things. Or actually, we're going to do four things, and I'll do the first one of them. First is a few framing remarks to baseline the discussion that we're just about to have. And then we're going to take up three threads of discussion, which can broadly be oriented around conceptualizing tech transfer, models of tech transfer, and then monetizing tech transfer. On the conceptual category, this is thinking about purpose and priorities of technology transfer. And as we're conceptualizing it, what is it and what should it be doing? Second is essentially a structure or an architecture that would effectuate that conception of tech transfer. That is, what sort of architecture, second, makes sense. And then third, where's the money? So to the extent that tech transfer is going to be reconceptualized, what is the priority rank of monetization? And if it's a high priority, how is that going to work? By way of background, a little bit of framing, I'm going to say something about Wharf, Bayh-Dole, in Waterloo, Canada. And if it makes sense, I'll take a bonus point. Starting with Wharf. So going back to Harry Steenbach in 1925, he was a Wisconsin professor who realized that if you added vitamin D to food, this would have certain benefits, not the least of which is it would prevent rickets in children. And Quaker Oats came and said, we will give you $900,000, professor, for your invention. That's about $12 million in today's money. And ever the professor, I think he was probably self-aware of his self-interest, but he was a good dude. And he thought, that's not fair. The university deserves a piece of this. And so he was instrumental in the University of Wisconsin setting up the first technology transfer office, which gets off the ground in 1927. And an important preview of things to come, it ultimately licensed Professor Steenbach's technology to Quaker Oats and set up a licensing operation that moved forward from there. Fast forward to 1980, there is impetus to see more moves from technology in the labs at universities to commercialization. Congress gets into the act and passes the Bayh-Dole Act of 1980. The thesis behind Bayh-Dole is that by allowing universities to own the intellectual property that's developed based on federal dollars, this will incentivize universities to be more active around commercialization. And while it's probably somewhat a matter of debate as to whether that step was necessary, one thing is clear: it did promote universities patenting more technology out of their labs. A typical split, for example, here at University of Colorado, and Kate, please disabuse me if I get this wrong, is proceeds from university, from inventions that come through tech transfer will be 1/4 to the inventor, 1/4 to the inventor's lab, 1/4 to the chancellor across campus, and 1/4 to technology transfer office. Roughly good enough. I've got her approval. That's good. Haven't done it too much injustice. And finally, fast forward to Waterloo, Canada today. So this is not necessarily an inevitable path forward, but this is one path forward, which goes back to the pre-Steenbach days. Waterloo, Canada has decided the best way to get ideas off the campus is to allow inventors on the campus to own everything, whether they are faculty, whether they are PhD students. The thesis here being this will allow them to attract a more entrepreneurial scientist to the campus, and this will give the scientists maximum incentive to pursue commercial possibilities. So with that by way of backdrop, let me introduce Larry, Brad, Monisha, and Sarah. And their full bios are in your programs. I won't go through that, but I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves through the prism by which you have had experience in technology transfer directly. You want me to start with Sarah, Larry?
Sure.
Sarah, go ahead.
Okay. My name is Sarah Pritchard, and I am Deputy General Counsel at the National Center for Atmospheric Research. We're managed by UCAR, but most people don't recognize that acronym as much as NCAR. I came to NCAR after several years in the pharmaceutical industry where we did a lot of chemical development and tech transfer on the commercial end. And then at NCAR, we have numerous inventions, a lot of modeling and software that involves technology transfer. So there you go.
Monisha?
Great. Monisha Merchant. I am with U.S. Senator Michael Bennett's office. And I started out my career as an engineer working at Lucent and working on the commercialization of some of the Bell Labs R&D for telecommunications products. I've also been a regent at the University of Colorado, so very familiar with what's happening on the campus here. And then for Senator Bennett, we've been looking at technology transfer from the federal R&D labs and how to increase access for entrepreneurs and companies to that level of technology and new discovery.
I'm Brad Hattenbach. I'm a patent attorney with Dorsey & Whitney and have represented the CU Tech Transfer Office for almost 10 years as one of many outside counsel that they go to seek patent protection for inventions. On a couple of occasions, I've also helped with some licensing issues there, but my focus has been on helping protect the inventions through patents.
Larry?
I'm Larry Gold, and I've started 3 biotech companies in Boulder, and I've written in quotation, in air quotes, because in fact that's not true, but I've invented stuff that is in 400 or 500 U.S. patents, some number like that. It's more than 3. And I've interacted with the Patent Tech Transfer Office in CU since 1981. There wasn't one in 1981. And when we formed the first company we formed, we went to the university trying to give them some equity, and they didn't know how to accept it, so they didn't matter. It didn't matter. It wasn't worth anything anyway, but it was interesting. And then it got created sometime after that. So now they know how to do stuff. And I've worked with them over the years, and I have a lot of strong thoughts.
All right, so let's start broadly in terms of purposes and goals about tech transfer. Larry, I'll start with you. In terms of first principles, what should a tech transfer operation at a major public research university be driven by? What should the goals be in order?
Yeah, that's fun. First, the first thing the university should think about is its mission as a university, not as a business. And it's interested in teaching and in helping society and blah, blah, blah. And so I think of tech transfer as part of that for the university, and it ought to be to get things into play that help society. That doesn't tell you what model to use, but it tells you what the goal ought to be. I've never thought that it is about making money for the university. That's not its goal, any more than the football team, which loses money every year also at most places. So this is another illusory idea that's wrong. And so all the tech transfer places they want a model essentially based on Stanford and MIT or something, and you can't do that because Stanford and MIT are different than this place. This place is very good, but it's not Stanford and MIT or MIT. And so I think the basic idea is to get things into play because it was paid for by the government.
Brad, how do you see it?
I would agree with that. I think the tension that is rising now is that, to Larry's last point, the government isn't paying for much anymore. And so you've got a lot of pressure on the institutions to try and figure out, well, how do we generate revenue to fund our research? And if the government isn't paying for it anymore, where do we get those dollars? And therefore, we need to look elsewhere. And do we look at private industry and look at partnerships with private industry to help fund us? Then that puts this pressure on the university that gets away from perhaps that core mission of we should be doing basic research and trying to teach and trying to promote education in our society. And well, are we doing what we really need to do, or are we trying to do that while being pushed in certain directions by outside requirements that we are trying to fulfill in order to get the money to do what we want to do? So I think that's a big tension right now.
So Monish, I'm going to come back to you momentarily, but I want to tee up Sarah. For those of you who are familiar with UCAR, you might know that, as Larry put it, getting the ideas out there is effectively still the dominant version of tech transfer that UCAR has. Let me see if I can give the quick version of this, and you can do a clarifying. UCAR is a nonprofit entity that manages NCAR and also has a consortium of 100 universities behind it. They respond to different agencies, and the agencies are, in terms of Sarah?
The agency, the National Science Foundation, NASA, the FAA, NOAA, Department of Defense, almost everybody.
And those agencies, by and large, put a great deal of accent on, as Larry said, at getting the ideas out there. Is that a fair assessment?
Everybody except the Department of Defense, I would say.
Okay. With that backdrop, give your perspective about tech transfer, especially as you think that those things apply or not to a research university.
Sounds good. So NCAR is a federally funded research and development center, so our entire purpose is to partner with the government and I'm looking at a definition here provided by the government, with the highest level of objectivity and technical excellence, work in the public interest. So 99% of what we are funded to do gets back in, if not the public domain, just granted back, at least open source. Sometimes we will still protect our technology. I was looking at your description of the traditional model. So we definitely have the invention disclosure and then the protection and the licensing. But protection for us doesn't mean monopolization and exclusivity. What it means is protecting our ability to continue our science. So we might file a patent defensively to prevent someone else from preventing us moving forward. Protecting our reputation and our ability to get credit for our work. And protecting ourselves from liability. So a lot of the open source models work for us on the copyright end. We use the OSI open source initiative and other tech transfer models for a great deal of our work, because as long as our liability is limited, we get credit and we can continue to do our work. That's the way we work. And there are other models too that are more traditional. But.
So Manisha, let me put some of the purposes that have been cited on the table. Getting ideas out there, although there might be reasons to do some protection, as was just mentioned, the ability to continue doing your science, the ability to protect your reputation, but there's also what may be a countervailing motive, which is monetization, especially for a university where shrinking state support, tuition that's capped out, shrinking federal funds, we're looking for new paths to monetization. How do you see the core purposes of tech transfer?
So I agree with what's been said before, and I think we have to take one step back. I think the Tech Transfer Office is really providing a service to the university. So they're providing a service to the researchers, can provide a service to the students with the expertise of how to evaluate those various strategies that we just discussed. Should we patent? Should we license? And I think the other thing, and this is what we found through the study that was done through the GAO at the national level, is that another role that has been attempted but still has a long way to go is being that linkage from the scientific community and the research and development community with the external startup, entrepreneurial, and the business community, creating space and opportunities for those types of interactions to occur. Again, with the Technology Transfer Office being the expert in terms of what are the legal structures that need to go behind what those relationships turn into. But what we really need to see more and more, I think, is an understanding of what is actually happening in these research labs and within the universities or in the federal level, so that those who are developing technologies that are in the commercial sector and who might be coming up against some limitation are able to find out what actually is going on in an environment that is driven by, basic research and advancement of science.
So let's pick up on that theme, and I'm interested from the panel. There's at least 3 dimensions of the services that we could break out. One is the one that Manisha highlighted, which is what's the right intellectual property strategy here. A second is identifying whether there's potentially a market for this technology and whether it's promising enough to move forward, some sort of market analysis. And a third is entrepreneurial education of sorts, that now we've got an idea, but at the end of the day, the execution on this idea is going to be difficult. There's lots of frictions to find in a management team and taking the idea forward. There may be others that you have in mind. How much of a role do you see tech transfer having along those dimensions or others? Larry?
I was hoping you wouldn't pick on me. I mean, you're talking about I guess it's a CP Snow 2 culture problem of some sort. You have inventors who are children. Let me say this in a gentle way. You have academic inventors who are children, at best. Every once in a while, you get someone old who's done it a few times, and they're not exactly children, but most of them are children. They expect to be taken care of by the Tech Transfer Office, and you don't have to look up and nod as though you're agreeing with me, because I know you're on the end of it, and they expect you to do everything. Tech Transfer Office, on the other hand, comes from a different culture. They're not scientists. They can't be. You can't have enough scientists in the Tech Transfer Office to cover all the inventions that are getting made. So they're sort of business oriented. And so there's this kind of parent-child relationship that's just flitting back and forth, and nobody knows what to do with it. So the problem is deeply cultural, in my humble opinion, and not easily solved by any of the things that you do that you think you might do that don't involve deep therapy. So I've suggested deep therapy sessions for when somebody brings you an invention disclosure. You sit down with your psychiatrist and the inventor, and you talk for about a year, and then you let them write their patent because they'll be but not children. That's my plan. That's my motto.
Well, let's circle back. I'm going to take that as a friendly fourth dimension of a role for tech transfer, which might be to transform the cultural dynamic that you just identified.
If I'm right, we need them to do that.
Other thoughts? Sarah?
I think that it's interesting that Larry characterizes the scientists in that way. Since this is recorded, I disagree. I'm just kidding. But we have, I think we've spent a lot of time, my boss has spent a lot of time, I spend a lot of time, we have another attorney in our office, communicating with the scientists to get them to understand the benefits of providing us with an invention disclosure. We are very decentralized in the way that we approach this and give the scientists a great deal of authority to determine how they want to go. So they'll come to us and say, I want to patent. And our first question is, well, why? Sometimes that reason is in order to, the protections that we talked about, primarily credit, and having a patent on a CV is important to them. And that's valid and totally supported by us. But I guess it starts with communicating, getting out there and talking about the value of the disclosures, the concern that one might have in collaborating without an NDA or non-disclosure agreement. So it's all communication, I would say, to change the culture. And also not being pedantic in a way that says, this is the way you will do it. But we have the luxury of being able to be decentralized and giving our scientists that kind of authority to step up and decide how they want to use us as a tool to get done what they need.
So I want to put a fine point on the challenge that Larry raised, that, and this is not specific at all to Colorado's tech transfer operation. This is endemic anywhere, I think, at a university. You've got researchers doing leading edge world-class work that's fundamental, and you are, as a licensing associate, asked to evaluate two different things. One is, how important is this research and does it need to be protected? That's question number one. And then often number two, is there going to be a market for this interesting solution? Is there a pain point out there that we can find the solution is going to solve for? If you're only one person, even if you're an expert in that area, that's a pretty formidable task. Do you guys have a similar type of problem? And if so, are there any interesting solutions that you guys have had to get more eyes and knowledge on those questions?
Well, it's definitely a problem for us because we're lawyers and not business people. And that sounds like a cop-out. I know, when you first say that. It's not a cop-out. It's the expertise that is involved and the resources involved in order to go find and do business development is just not something that the federal government is supporting for us. So it comes out of a different budget. And we've found that the best way to, so we don't spend a lot on the marketing side or business development within the tech transfer office. We rely on our scientists who know how valuable their material is. And so we will actually, and there's an optimism here that I will disclose, which is we ask our scientists to partner with commercial entities and give us an understanding in the legal department of how valuable this stuff is. So there is a level of trust in terms of that I think someone from a commercial, an attorney from a commercial company would be, might recoil in horror. But our goal is, as I said, primarily on the liability and the credit side, on the protection end. So if we get some money in, that's great, but that's not our primary focus. So.
Manisha, have you seen other models of entrepreneurial education emerge elsewhere that you've been impressed or intrigued by?
I think a lot of the institutions have a long way to go, but if you look at the federal lab infrastructure versus, let's say, a university research infrastructure, the advantage that the university has is the fact that you have a business school, that you have a law school, that you have an engineering department that's already gone through the applied science in developing technologies. And where I think the next trend is really having the entire university collaborate in that way. So the examples that Phil gave in the beginning about what CU is doing, and that's the advantage that you have. In the federal lab context, the commercialization piece happens more externally in interaction either with other contractors or engagement with those communities, which still has a long way to go as well, in being able to communicate what research is actually going on in your respective labs. But where universities can really go to the next level is tap into, it's like a mini company in a sense, right? You're training in your business school, you're training the marketing, product development, accounting, finance team, and in law school, you're training the next general counsels, for example. And you have, within the engineering school itself, folks who have already thought about applications for the basic science that's being developed.
Larry, you want to jump in on that?
I mean, it's what Way says is wonderful, and so I love it. And I know that our tech transfer office occasionally, I don't know how occasionally, I don't even know when they call me, they reach out to others, and I'm sure they reach out to others in the university. I'm sure they do. And but maybe not always, and maybe not taking advantage of the environment in quite the way you said, which is a fantastic idea. I mean, I think that most of what you, Kate, get, or you, Bryn, get, is you get some inventor who thinks they invented a fucking law of thermodynamics instead of what they really did was make another buffer, or, you know, raise the magnesium concentration by 2 millimolar. So most people don't invent laws of thermodynamics. I mean, let's just say that doesn't happen. And yet the inventor is so smitten with his or her thoughts that, in a sense, you're in an adversarial position more or less as you start, because the inventor thinks it's fantastic. I was once sent with a patent for or an application that you guys loved, and it was a wonderful application. It was about 8 years ago. And I knew of 10 people who were already practicing that invention. It was not an invention. It wasn't an invention, it was common knowledge. Even one unskilled in the art knew how to do this. It was that stupid. And when I said that to you guys, it did no good, not because you didn't agree with me. I know you agreed with me. But the inventor himself or herself, I happen to know which it was, but it doesn't matter. It was one of those two, I think. But the inventor had a point of view that this was another law of thermodynamics. And so this is an impossible cultural problem that has to be solved. Never mind a year of therapy, but you got to take advantage of people, and people have to listen to each other. It's not easy, but real. If the university people can't listen to each other, there's no hope for, say, for example, Congress.
Brad, when you're getting involved, you're representing the university, the tech transfer office typically, is that right?
Right.
And then you're interfacing with the inventor as you're helping decide what the right strategy is going to be. Do you sense this dynamic that Larry's talking about, that sometimes the inventors are, well, there's a couple different dynamics. One is the overestimation of what I've contributed here, problem.
Sure.
And then the second is, boy, I've made this massive contribution. All you guys got to do is the rest, and that's a minor part, an underestimation of what would have to happen for this to be a success.
I think it depends on the personality, involved, but there's certainly, times when the inventor thinks that, yeah, we've got this, this really great thing, and is pushing the tech transfer office pretty hard to follow through, and there's some political capital being pushed around as well, especially when the TTO thinks, this isn't really what it's all cut up to be. But on the other hand, there there is some political power here, and we think we need to satiate this person. I've seen that kind of dynamic go on, and so we're going to go forward when maybe we think we shouldn't, or that it's not the best investment necessarily, and so it ultimately then maybe takes a little bit more time down the road before you get to the point where you feel like you can cut it off. You know, in my role, we try to, you know, counsel just, you know, based on, you know, as we, you know, as the IP, and do we think that there's, based on the prior art, if there's room for this invention, what the value might be based on the prior art, or, you know, what the breadth of protection you might get, and provide that information so that decisions can be made. But, you know, ultimately that's a decision that's then going back to the TTO to negotiate with the inventors. So
I'm going to ask you all to be architects now. So you've articulated, here's the broad purposes and goals that you think a university tech transfer operation should be oriented around. Now make it specific in terms of how would you go about architecting an organizational structure, what kinds of resources would it need to make that vision a reality, and one piece of architecture is enough. I'm not asking for multiple blueprints, but one vision for here's how this could be architected.
Brad, I have a question for you too, and maybe for the others on the panel, is that one of the challenges that we have, and Brad mentioned it, is that with the more limited funding, trying to partner with commercial companies, not when we already know that there's value. What we're struggling with is that trying to protect the things I mentioned, which is no liability, keeping our ownership of the technology and getting it out there, and yet partnering with a commercial company who wants an exclusive. That's completely inconsistent with the way we work. So part of our job is educating and spending a lot of time educating commercial companies in really, when we say we have to own the technology, we're not kidding. That's not, it's a deal killer. But not, we try not to express, we express that early and often, but there's an uphill battle that we win often, but would like to win more often, where commercial companies understand us, understand what our goals are, and see the value in working with us, even if they can't keep it to themselves. We worked with Excel, and they've saved, Meg, do you know, it's like $40 million with our technology. But originally, they wanted to own that technology. They didn't want their competitors to have it. And after months and months of talking and talking, they saw the value elsewhere. That was a huge success for us. But I think that's a huge challenge, is communicating with and partnering with commercial organizations who their goal is a little bit different. But so architecture of a tech transfer office is making sure your folks understand what your goals are, so that you're not selling out when you're working with commercial organizations. That's huge.
That's what Sarah just said is really true, because I've got clients, and they'll remain nameless, but that are spin-offs of the university, and I'll have conversations because the technology gets licensed out to them, and then they're in control of the patent prosecution. And at that point, we stop representing the TTO specifically. We start representing the spin-off, and you know, they're now a business, and they've got a goal to maximize profits, et cetera. And there will be conversations about, gosh, we need to get away from the university technology. We need to get to next gen and make sure that next gen is not covered by the university technology, because we don't want to pay the licensing fee back to the university. We don't have to if our ultimate product sales are not based on the university technology, but the university technology was the basis of how they got there. And so I know that the licensing associates in the university are working really hard in terms of negotiating deals to make sure that they're not locked into a situation like that, but where the license covers things like know-how and ongoing research and all sorts of things, so that the monetary flow, there is still something going back to the university, but there's definitely a tension with the licensees from a business standpoint there. So
if we go, from my perspective, again, the Technology Transfer Office is really like a services entity within the university or within the federal lab. And I think from a structural perspective, it's really being able to articulate the value proposition internally to the university and to the scientists and to the departments, and also being able to articulate the value proposition externally. So being able to communicate to commercial partners what the engagement really looks like and what are some other examples, and focus less on just focus beyond the licensing agreement or the actual interaction on the technology, but what that overall relationship looks like over time once you're building it with those particular labs, to the scientists and the science and a longer term R&D community.
Sorry, Larry. Go ahead.
Is it okay? You sure?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, all right. So this is your question about models and being an architect. And you started by making a speech about Waterloo, Canada. So I vote for us becoming Canadians or Swedish. So you know that I used to give lectures to the Tech Transfer Office to their horror that they should go away. I don't think that, by the way. I think they should be part of an academic department in the law school, if you want my honest opinion, but you don't. But let's talk about the model. What's the model of Waterloo, Canada, which I didn't ever hear about until today? And what's the Swedish model? And why did I used to call it the Swedish miracle? So if you go to Uppsala, which is a town about the same size as Boulder, and you go to the biotech park, let me point out there is no biotech park in Boulder, by the way, okay? None, okay? If the history of biotech in Boulder, Colorado is Larry Gold, you're in trouble, okay? That's what I would like to say, in all honesty. Let's go here, guys. We got to do something. Go to Uppsala. 78, I made that number up. It could be 80, it could be 200, I don't know. In the biotech park, company after company after company. How'd they do that? They got the same scientists we do. The whole country's only got 10 million people. They probably got 200,000 people living in Uppsala. Bang, biotech park. Oh, well, maybe that's just a fluke. So then you go to Lund, another 100 companies doing biotech in their biotech park. How'd they do that? You go to Stockholm, that's bigger, 400. Big ones, I know many of them. There's a whole bunch of people that start companies. What do they do? They do the Waterloo model, but they did it first. They don't call it Waterloo, they call it Sweden. And they gave everything to the inventors. Bang. So what does that do? It takes the inventors that I call children in an insulting way, and it says, you don't have to write a patent, you can do whatever you want. We don't care, publish it, don't publish it, it's up to you. If you want to patent it, go find some money, take care of it, it's your business. We're interested in economic development in Sweden. These companies are unbelievable. I believed, by the way, that it's okay for the university to get something. I'm not an idiot. I mean, we should give something to the university, 5%, 10%, I don't know, something, because it was done here. That's consistent with the Bayh-Dole Act of 1980, which I actually read once. These guys own it all, and they go out and build companies. And they get help from the university. The university is a help desk, the way you're talking about a tech transfer office. You can help. The tech transfer office should know all the lawyers that want to pitch in for a little equity, whatever it is. You end up saying, don't be a child, build your dream. And I think we should do that. I'm done.
Larry, let me come back to
Leave me alone.
how that structure would work out vis-a-vis the goals that you articulated up front. Especially, I like that language of get the ideas out there. Does the model that you just articulated run the risk that researchers are going to be primarily focused on their commercial interests? That is, does it provide too much incentive to engage in commercial activity and not enough incentive to do the fundamental research, or is your experience, intuition otherwise?
My experience and my intuition are the opposite. You cannot build a company with a stupid idea. So you better discover something good. And if you discover something good, I'm a capitalist and a socialist at the same time. Get it into play, go raise some money. You say, I don't have enough money to even write the patent. $5,000 or something. So, okay, go borrow it from your uncle. I don't know, go borrow it from you. Will you loan me $5,000? I'll take it. I'll go write a patent. It's crazy, okay, that we put the university in charge of what are the dreams of the scientists, inventors, and the students. And in the Swedish miracle that I'm talking about, the CEO of a very important company in Uppsala right now is a graduate student. He was a graduate student. I sat on his defense for his PhD thesis. His PhD thesis was that invention. He and his advisor started a company. They hired a grown-up. And then the grown-up said, I did enough. Simon's good enough to run this company. Now the graduate student is the CEO of a company in Uppsala. It's a terrific company. And so it works, okay? And the only part that doesn't work, I think, because the students, they get to play, right? The students are not treated like chattel by the PIs, because if they were, nobody would work in their labs. And so they're always inventing. The Swedish academic literature is incredibly strong. It's as good as here. It's great. So there's something here about control of something going on. I don't know. I think it would work. I don't know.
It's a bold vision. I'd be interested in reactions to it.
Go ahead.
Well, I don't know. I mean, as a lawyer, that's the problem. You've got the lawyer sitting here thinking about it, and it's like, oh, yes, control. We need control, and how do we, as the university and the TTO, maintain control over rights, and how do we get our share, and those sorts of things, and those are tensions that playing with that model, and you know, you've also got. And I don't know, because I'm not in an academic institution. You are. You might be able to answer this question better than I. But you know, if your goal is to be a university professor, and you're spending all your free time, you know, trying to run a company on the side, how does that impact your goal of becoming a professor? Because you're not publishing, you're not writing, you're not necessarily doing these things that you're supposed to be doing. You're not getting credit for establishing a very successful company. You're not.
Just because you invited the comment, I'll provide a couple quickly, and I don't want to cannibalize the next panel, which will probably be talking about some of the incentives for professors. But the anxiety that Brad just articulated is rampant across the campus. And there is a perspective that especially getting junior professors fired up about commercialization is going to be a distraction. It'll take them away from the important basic research that they should be pushing forward. And moreover, if CU takes too many steps towards becoming an entrepreneurial university, this will betray that fundamental research mission. To which, you know, the response is, yeah, you look at entrepreneurial universities, Stanford, MIT, Berkeley, it doesn't seem to have compromised their academic standing overall, you know, over the years. In fact, it probably has been a nice synergy, and that's Larry's point that you can't build real companies with bad ideas, or at least it's not going to work out over time.
And you can't sustain them without continuing to do science. We have things at SomaLogic all the time. We're graduate students and postdocs. We invite them down. We give them beer and pizza, and we talk about the science of being in a company. We don't tell them that, oh, this is the dark side. We don't do that. We do science. And so science is science, guys. Come on, cut it out. And so well, no, that's applied science instead of basic science. Well, that's stupid. Science is science. You got to answer a question. And so it's just crazy to make this hard line. And in fact, it comes up, this notion about exclusivity that you mentioned. I have very strong opinions that there are times that something is going to require hundreds of millions of dollars of investment at whoever licenses it, and they're not going to license that thing unless they get it exclusively. And so your real problem is not exclusivity versus not, I think. I think the real problem is diligence if you give exclusivity so you can make sure they do the job. Because the real job is to get the thing into play, not necessarily, oh, all the money goes to one company instead of 6 companies. That doesn't matter. The question is the product.
Well, I totally see your point. It's just that in our mission to act in the public interest, we can't be seen to be cozying up to one commercial entity too much. So it's
I didn't use the word cozying up. I said find the good partner who can make it happen. They're different.
Right. So I mean, it's a completely different model than we've been tasked to implement. But it sounds good to me. I mean, I'm an American capitalist. It sounds great. But so if the government tomorrow said, hey, from now on, inventor owns, We would just adjust.
So, Monisha, let me ask you to react to Larry, and I'm going to add one more fact to the hypothetical here, which is we've had a couple companies off the campus recently go through the I-Corps program, which is an NSF program. It's an intense 8 weeks or so where the founders off the campus will go and work their idea through. It's very heavy on empathy interviews and trying to find market fit so that the classic problem of a solution from the campus looking for a problem can be overcome. So to give this specific numbers, the companies that we had go through the program this summer in Washington, D.C. had to talk to, I believe it was 15 companies per week over the course of 8 weeks. And that is a lot of external facing discussions that I think it's fair to say does not normally occur for commercialization when people are otherwise researching. So Monisha, if we took an I-Corps offering plus Larry's vision, what would your thoughts be in terms of that? And maybe if someone went through what would be the local I-Corps, however it's structured, and they give up more of the company for going through that, but they see the value on the other end, how do you think that would work in terms of a structure?
In terms of how it's structured with the university?
Yeah.
And that, I think that complemented as long as the I-Corps program is not just the scientists, right? Like, again, the university advantage is the fact that you have multidisciplinaries and these functional experts across the board that can help actually create a company. So I think those programs are helpful. It's good for scientists and the engineers and the inventors within the research context to understand, and if they are driven in that direction, to get the support they need to go and start a company. But there's also the model where the scientists and engineers and the basic researchers continue to develop new and cool things and can partner with others in the university who actually want to take that off into a company. So I went back for my business school reunion over the weekend, and Yale has started an entrepreneurial program. And it used to be the way it was just in the business school. And the person who started it has said, look, 5 MBAs don't start a company. And what he's doing is making it so that the entire university is participating in it. Undergraduate students, graduate students, scientists, engineers, the medical school, the School of Public Health, all these different types of skill sets coming together, again, in this unique environment that's really only seen on a university campus. And so they're just in the beginning, so we'll see what that happens. But that was said multiple times over the weekend, so it stuck with me that it just can't be done in one, it can't just be a group of scientists meeting with each other. It needs to also, that has to have an interdisciplinary construct outside of the sciences into these other functional areas.
Don't forget that the cultural problems that we're all talking about exist between scientists also, who are not so keen about talking to the people down the hall.
Yeah.
You know that.
I'll use that as a commercial launch for a second before we go to the last topic. Phil averted to the New Venture Challenge, which is an interdisciplinary competition platform for developing companies. We had 60 different departments who participated in the New Venture Challenge last year, and the winning teams were exactly what Monisha said. It was a scientist, an MBA student, in one case a law student, and or people from computer science and the liberal arts that were on those teams. And I don't think it was a coincidence in terms of the kind of development. It's an interesting hack of the system, the way that's worked out. All right, so let's talk about monetization. This comes back to the problem that Sarah just posed. Several of the models that exist are difficult to monetize, and keeping in mind Larry's caution that monetization may not be the primary purpose of the university, there are financial constraints that the university is working within. And I think it's fair to say that if there's not a path to monetization, there will probably not be enormous university support for the future of tech transfer. Maybe I'm wrong about that, and feel free to let me know. But my question is, under whether it's Larry's vision or others, what paths to monetization do you see for models of tech transfer going forward?
One of the, since we're a federally funded research and development center, we're a little bit different than a university, and so our model is, extremely public, get it out there. we struggle with the issue Larry mentioned about how important exclusivity is to commercial organizations. And when we say we cannot have an exclusive relationship with you, that doesn't kill the conversation, but it gets pretty close. What we do is talk about the synergy that can exist between our technology and the commercial company's technology so that they will have an effective exclusivity. We don't ask them to share with us their technology, and we will keep confidential anything they provide to us. So if the partnership can result in some effective exclusivity where they can take our development and build on their product, or add to their product, that's where we've been most successful, or where they directly benefit from the tool that we've provided. But that said, the other issue with that is that when we partner with them and talk about this synergy, it's a constant struggle, and what we are trying to get are dollars to put back into, not necessarily, the royalties are secondary. We'd love to have them, but we're really trying to get more funding for more research. So we will have a commercial organization fund us to do research, and in return we'll give them a license to the technology that's pre-existing, as well as a license to the technology that they're paying for the development. But it's a struggle in terms of getting companies to sign on knowing they won't have an exclusive to our technology.
Larry, let's take up your vision. How's the path to monetization going to work on this?
I'd like us to do an experiment. Let's do a clinical trial. We'll get Kate to be the person that signs away to every other invention disclosure, all rights to the inventor. And Bryn will take the other people as they come through the door with their invention disclosures and hammer them to make whatever deals Bryn will negotiate. And we'll spend 10 years doing that, and we'll keep score. That's what a clinical trial is, and let's see what happens. And the truth is, none of us know. In Kate's job, she's got a number, whatever the number's, 5.8% of the equity. I made it up. It doesn't matter. You'll negotiate. We'll figure that out. And that's what you get. You don't get royalties, you get equity. And you don't have to put up any money. In fact, you don't pay a dime. And Bryn can only go write, silly provisional patents. I'm sorry, it was just a joke. And then later he'll find the money, and there'll be a cost of doing business, and they'll choose which ones to write the real PCTs and utilities and all that. And you got to keep score. And none of us know how it's going to come out. We all have very strong feelings that one way is better than others. And I don't know. All I know is that Lund and Uppsala are better than Boulder. And the scientists that I know in Boulder are just as good as the ones in Lund and Uppsala. So I know how I think the experiment's going to come out. But maybe it's that the Swedes are more entrepreneurial and we're not. I don't know. So I don't have a strong feeling, but you for sure can monetize in a model where you give the right to develop back to the inventors. For sure you can monetize somehow. If you take 80%, nobody will take it. They'll go to Bryn's door, and so you can't do that. But it's worth trying. That's what I think.
I think from a public policy perspective, right, if I know that the federal investment in R&D is declining, but if we look at what the institutions have gained over the years in terms of building their research capacity and the taxpayer funds that have gone in, the key really is to not go down this exclusive path for that shared invention and the investment that we've made as a country, right? We want to make sure that the licensing is done in a way so that as many people as possible who see the potential benefit and can do something with it in a commercial sector for society can take advantage of that. And so I know it's not necessarily it's not like a financial piece, but it's just one thing to keep in mind. As universities also morph and look for other sources of funding and try to develop partnerships, I think this is harder for the federal labs and something that we have to have a bigger conversation about at the national level. But as universities are trying to figure out how to work and again be able to articulate the value proposition they have with the expertise, with commercial sectors and enter in some of those agreements, that becomes an interesting new revenue stream where you're selling your R&D capacity and talents, not maybe fully, like not something that's been fully funded by the National Science Foundation, for example, but taking some of that talent and redirecting it to work with with another company, then that becomes a little bit interesting. And I know that the legislation at the national level still has a lot of layers of restrictions there, but that's something that probably you'll start seeing more and more of going forward.
Brad, I'm going to come back to you in a second. Sarah, I'd like to tee up. So you talked about the puzzle of working with a company that wants to tap into the resources that UCAR is superintending, but you can't give them exclusivity. What Manish is suggesting, I think, reflects the difference between tacit knowledge and formal knowledge. That is, formal knowledge, something that can be put in a paper. You don't get our formal knowledge that we can put into a patent, but you can get access to our scientists. You can get access to our tacit knowledge. Does that work?
I'm not sure I completely understand your question, Brad, but because I'm not sure when you kind of teed it up, we give access, if we've patented something, we still get it out there. So it's patented, and then we will grant a license to all comers.
But let me shorten my question. By the way, now you have sympathy for how my students feel when I'm trying to ask the question in class. They're like, well, what's going on? The distinction would be this. Formal knowledge, something that can be written in a paper.
Yep.
If I understand what you're saying, that's going to go out there anyway. That's part of UCAR's mission. But if you're going to monetize some of the research, what you could come in and say is, the formal knowledge will only go so far. You've got to have knowing and doing, and the person who invented this, the person that wrote that paper, is the man or woman that you need to be working with, and we can give you that. We can give you that tacit knowledge.
I get it. Yes, makes total sense. Okay, we come across that all the time. And what happens is the commercial entity will come to us, understand that we have the expertise to make the millions of dollars worth of, particularly it's the weather research forecasting tool is one of our models that is publicly available. We have scientists internally who can go to a commercial entity and make that system work and work the best that it can. They'll optimize it for a particular geographic area and for a particular system at a commercial company. What we struggle with that company is when we provide you that knowledge, we're licensing it to you, and we can take that knowledge ourselves, and when we leave you, commercial company, we can formalize it in a published paper, or we can decide to improve the model with everything we've learned. Everything you funded this expert to come in and do, we may take and add it to that public model. And that's, you had a second part to your question about what Monisha had mentioned, how the government gets involved. And I'm not sure how the government would get further involved, but what we take advantage of is to express to the commercial entity that, hey, you're getting a system that's terrific. It'll take us a period of time to get publications out there, but we have the choice as to whether to put the development back into the open source model.
You're going to have the opportunity, though, in that lag time to work with A-plus players that you wouldn't otherwise get access to, and you'll have the opportunity to get a head start in executing on that learning before it goes public.
And the other issue is if you're keeping this expert who is the best in their field, if you've got him busy, he's not doing something else for some competitor. That's kind of a cheating, but that's the truth. Is we only have a certain number of experts, and if they're busy working for one commercial organization, they're not working for the competitor. And that's been very convincing for some of these commercial organizations to go ahead and fund that salary. And that's not the sole, motivator.
Brad, any reactions on the monetization discussion?
I think it's, there's the one extreme here, but I think that the main point that I do like about this is that you've got the TTO, which is, 15 licensing associates across all the campuses, and they're out beating the bushes and trying to market and promote all the technology that's going on at the university to as many partners as they can find, right? And Larry's idea is more, hey, give it to the individual and let them go figure it out. And I think maybe the broader point is that if the university were more involved with the business community at all levels, and that the researchers and the faculty were engaged with the community, the business community, and the business community knew what was going on and was interested and had a better understanding of what was going on in the university as far as the research goes. They're invited to various sessions, et cetera, that you've now got a much larger marketing tool, marketing organization, if you will, than the 15 people in the office. And by doing that, you end up with a lot more relationships between industry and the university that can, ultimately you build those relationships and ultimately it can be leveraged. And whether it's, it may not have to go as far as you give the inventor the rights, but at least there's more knowledge out there in the community, in the business community of what's going on. And hey, I really think that this professor is really bright and what they're doing in this department is really good, and we should watch them, and maybe we want to hire them as a consultant or what have you, and develop those stronger relationships.
Larry, one question, final question for you, and then I'm sure that there's going to be plenty of audience questions to follow. There is a path of monetization we haven't talked about, and I'm going to embarrass you a little bit, and I'm sorry in advance. Can you be embarrassed? Can I embarrass you?
No.
Which I think about this usually in the student context, that we have students who come through, pick up experiences, get connected in the entrepreneurial community. They're going to start businesses that have success. And one of my hopes is over the next 15 to 20 years, we have people who say, but for that experience, when I was at CU, I would not be where I am today. Let me come back and say thank you. It's a donation model, right? It's a time lag model. Is that a path to monetization associated with a broader version of technology transfer that you think is viable?
Yeah, yes. I know that it's a wonderful idea that people who profit from being here are generous. So I agree with that. Yeah. I mean, you can't make it a law. I mean, that's why it's called charity, not tax. They're different. I understand that, but it's a good idea. And lots of people do it. Lots of people who've made a lot of money in biotech have given huge amounts of money back to their universities one way or another.
But the embarrassment part is you have.
Oh, I wasn't even remembering that. I had a bad hair day. Anyway, so yes, it's of course a good idea. I mean, I think the whole idea of involving what Moniz said, the entire community, including undergraduates and graduate students and people from every discipline in this entrepreneurial activity, will make more students want to come here. It will make them beholden to the place, whatever their successes are. It's all good. And so I don't have anything. I'm not embarrassed because I didn't take it personally.
Questions for the panel? I think we've got a microphone coming around. So Cliff, take the first question, and once Cliff asks the question, if you could take the microphone, I'll point out to the next person. Cliff?
Hi, I'm Cliff Harold with the Boulder Economic Council, and I can't help but wondering if the business models exemplified by Techstars, Galvanize, and the way that they do technology and business development couldn't apply somehow in this conversation, especially as it relates to monetization. Now, clearly, they've got a venture capital component here that radically changes the conversation. But it seems to me that this control issue is so closely linked with the funding issue that it's worth discussing, can those models apply in some way to tech transfer from universities and even conceivably from research labs?
Cliff, just to frame this, can you say a word about Techstars and the model that you're referring to for those that might not be familiar with it?
Sure. So Techstars and Galvanize are different organizations, but they have some core commonalities. One is they bring in new technologies, inventors, not often scientists, but inventors nonetheless, They provide mentorship from sort of the adults in the room, to follow up on Larry's kind of children analogy here. They provide a mentorship. They provide a place for people to collaborate and work together. And in both cases, they provide significant amounts of funding. Not always the same amounts of funding, but they can provide significant amounts of funding, and they have skin in the game with many, if not most, of the companies.
You know, in that model, the missing piece in the discussion, not I know you know this, there's some things that you can turn into a real business in a year and a month. And there's some things, SomaLogic is an example, we've been around for 14 years. We finally had real revenues as opposed to selling stock to people after 12 years, okay? And during that time, we spent $200 million. So the timing and the cost of biology, the only thing I really know, versus, you know, hula hoops or, so that's, sorry, I don't mean that, but some other kind of thing that doesn't require a lot of investment changes the discussion a little bit.
Their thoughts on that?
Not from the UCAR perspective. I just know that some universities have an organization, I don't know that it's within the Tech Transfer Office, where they provide some core funding once they know something might be commercial. And Kate, you and I had attended some conference about that. Doesn't CU have some seed money that they almost have a kind of venture capital pool of funds?
The state has advanced industries accelerator.
For those in the back who might not have heard that, she was talking about the state's program for the Advanced Industry Accelerator, which provides some seed funding for early stage companies. Yeah.
I'm Steve Glenner from Cable Labs. To Larry's point of, well, let's do a big experiment, let's give it all away and see how much invention we get, versus let's control it all and own the patents and the inventors own nothing apart from a line on their resume. Do we have any kind of sensitivity analysis of inventiveness versus ownership that says we get some idea of what the slope is there, so we can try and optimize that in terms of how much do we want to give, you know, rather than it's all or nothing, how much of ownership in the ideas do we want to give people, and what would the impact would that have on the degree of invention and innovation that takes place in the university?
I think all the universities are trying to get to that sweet spot. The federal government requires us, and I think universities, if they receive federal funding, that the inventors get a portion of the royalties. I know CU gives a portion. We did an analysis of what many of the universities are doing in order to decide how much funding or what portion the inventors would get of the royalties that come in. So there is a percentage that goes to the inventors. I don't know what that sweet spot is about how much, but you, Brad, I think you'd mentioned it was 25% at CU that they get. Meg, what is it at our institution? At least 20% or 10% and 10% up front before even the, and it's not 10% of net, it's 10% of gross, so that they can see the money immediately, and then a certain portion thereafter.
A lot of it goes back, though, to Larry's original point. What is the purpose of university, and are we trying to turn all the professors into entrepreneurs, and are those people the best people to be entrepreneurs and trying to drive it? I mean, a lot of them really just want to do the basic research and let somebody else deal with that sort of thing. So I think a lot of it has to do with what Manish is talking about, and I think what I said earlier in terms of trying to develop broader relationships with the business community, so that, you know, this person can do what they like to do and use their talents in the best way possible, which is continue to do that research, and maybe you know, the business that's interested in it continues to use that research and pays for that person to continue doing what they do, and there's some skin in the game for the university in an equity position or whatever it might be. But I don't know, you know, I think that's an interesting question, is do we want our universities to be, you know, entrepreneurial pools as opposed to teaching and research institutions?
But you just made the old bifurcation. It's one or the other.
Well, no, I'm not saying it has to be, but I'm saying that I don't know that the majority of the incentive of giving somebody 50% of the revenue or whatever, that's necessarily going to be an incentive for a lot of people that are university professors.
There's a fact that's not clear to everybody. If the university licenses something to, say, a startup company, which can't happen, I think, in your setting over there, the inventor from the university, in every university that I know, is allowed to go and participate in that startup company. So at some level, inventors are already incentivized well beyond their fraction of whatever the university gets in licensing to a VC. So essentially, inventors get to double dip legally and properly for their continued involvement. If they choose not to, then they just get whatever they got. But so it's not, I think the incentivization about money is kind of okay the way it is. I don't think there's much room to fiddle, and you wouldn't get enough data points to know what it meant anyway, I think. And so I think the reason people go off and start companies, the reason I did, I mean, I was the chairman when I left my wonderful department, because I couldn't figure out a way to do the work I wanted to do at the last company that I wanted to see done in a university setting. It was not about anything except, gee, the scale has to be different. So it's a different kind of question, not about incentives. It would have worked out okay either way.
I'm going to insert myself really quickly in terms of who's going to be engaged in this. I've seen a couple of anecdotal points that I'm extrapolating for. PhD students now know becoming a professor is a lottery ticket. There's something like 8 PhD students for every professor position in the United States right now, and that's not open position, that's position full stop. And something has changed over the last 3 or 4 years where PhD students are much more interested in positioning themselves for commercial opportunities and entrepreneurship in a way that I just did not see even as recently as 5 years ago on the campus. Next question.
Yeah, my name is Todd Headley. I'm with the CSU Technology Transfer Office. Beautiful day, by the way, down here. Love it. Great panel.
Welcome.
But I can speak a little bit to the models we talked about, inventor-owned or not. In Europe, particularly, there's a faculty member at CSU who's actually looked at this pretty extensively. And so, to Dr. Gold's point, there has been a bit of a clinical trial going on already. Canada has a mixed system, I believe. Sweden and some other European countries, as I understand it, are actually morphing more toward the U.S. model, but I don't know why. They all have to be done correctly, but just from a standpoint of looking at what may or may not be working at some other places, that could be worth looking at as well. So.
The professor who's doing the research up there,
Greg Graff.
Graff?
Yeah,
Great.
Graff.
Let's follow up afterwards. We'll post it on the Silicon Flatiron site for people who want to follow up to some of that research. All right, this is a conversation that could go on a lot longer. This has been fantastic. Please help me thank Larry, Brad, Monisha, and Sarah.
Nice meeting you.
Good to meet you.
We have a 15-minute break, and we'll reconvene in here at 2:30. Yeah.